My name is Kate, and I'm just an ordinary girl living in a small town. My life has always been pretty mundane, with a typical 9 to 5 routine that repeats almost every day. Every morning, when the alarm goes off, I wake up to its insistent beeping, rub my sleepy eyes, and drink a cup of instant coffee before rushing off to work. I work as a copywriter at a small advertising agency. Despite the pressure, I always manage to find some fun in it. The casual chats with my colleagues and the laughter during lunch breaks are essential parts of my life that bring me a lot of joy. I have a cheerful personality and love making friends. I often hang out with my friends on weekends or go hiking to enjoy the beauty of nature. Even though my life seems pretty uneventful, I always feel a deep-seated desire for adventure within me, wanting to explore the unknown. Perhaps that's why there's always a tinge of restlessness in my heart, as if I'm waiting for a moment that could change my fate, hoping for an unexpected adventure. That day, I stepped out of my house as usual and drove to the office. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting a golden glow on the road. I rolled down the window, feeling the gentle breeze on my face, and my mood was particularly good, as if everything was just perfect. Just as I was soaking in this peace and comfort, my phone suddenly buzzed with a message from a friend inviting me to go hiking over the weekend. I felt a rush of excitement and was about to reply when a deer suddenly dashed out from the roadside. I barely had time to react, slamming on the brakes, and my car skidded out of control into the bushes before crashing into a tree with a loud bang. In that instant, I felt a violent jolt, followed by a deafening crash, as if the whole world was collapsing around me. The air was filled with the smell of burnt rubber, and the airbag deployed, hitting my face hard, causing intense pain. My mind was a blur, dizzy and racing, and my heart was pounding. I struggled to calm myself and clear my thoughts. After a few seconds, I realized I was still alive, though everything around me was a mess, with my belongings scattered all over the car, making me feel anxious. I slowly unbuckled my seatbelt and tried to sit up. My legs felt weak, as if I had lost all strength. I braced myself against the steering wheel and struggled to stand. The sight outside the car filled me with panic. My car was a wreck, surrounded by dense forest, and in the distance, I could vaguely see a sign that read, "Military Restricted Area, No Entry." My heart sank as I realized I might have wandered into a dangerous place, and a sense of unease washed over me. I tried to make a call on my phone, but there was no signal. The silence around me was eerie, broken only by the rustling leaves in the breeze, as if they were whispering secrets. The sun began to set, casting shadows all around, and I felt a wave of anxiety, deciding I had to look for a way out. I cautiously stepped out of the car, and the forest around me felt ominous, with towering trees blocking out the light. I attempted to retrace my steps, but the more I walked, the more uneasy I felt, as if each step deepened my panic. My heartbeat echoed loudly in the silence, reminding me that I was in an unknown area. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense and suffocating. The shadows between the trees seemed to shift, and an indescribable sense of oppression filled the air. I started to feel anxious, repeatedly asking myself how I could escape this place. Just then, I came across a tall barbed wire fence stretching endlessly in both directions. My heart raced as I realized I had crossed some kind of boundary into a place I shouldn't be. Just as I was about to turn back, I heard a low growl nearby that froze me in my tracks, filling me with dread. Panic surged through me, and my instinct screamed that I had to run. I turned to flee, but the forest seemed to twist and grow more complex, the paths between the trees blurring. I ran desperately, filled with anxiety and fear, sensing an invisible threat closing in on me, as if something was watching me from the shadows. I pushed forward, trying to escape this suffocating place, but the environment shifted around me, making me feel more lost. I was running for my life in the forest, overwhelmed by endless fear and despair. The towering trees around me seemed to morph, their branches swaying in the wind, mocking my ignorance and fragility. In this dark wilderness, I didn't know which direction to escape, and the deep growls grew closer, as if they were hot on my trail. My heart raced, my breathing quickened, and my leg muscles tightened with each step, feeling like I was climbing an invisible mountain. But I knew I couldn't stop. I had to keep going, searching for a glimmer of hope, no matter how tough the road ahead might be. Finally, with what little strength I had left, I burst through the thick underbrush and stumbled into a clearing, feeling as if I had caught a glimpse of light. In the center of the clearing stood a massive building, its exterior dilapidated, with crumbling walls and shattered windows that sent chills down my spine. The walls were covered in strange, obscure symbols that made my heart ache. The eerie atmosphere and the chilling aura surrounding the structure hinted at dark secrets and unsolved mysteries. My unease intensified, causing me to hesitate. Caught between fear and survival instinct, I ultimately decided to seek refuge inside this building. Perhaps I could find a way out here. My legs trembling, I hurried toward the structure and pushed open the creaking door, which emitted a warning squeak, as if telling me not to enter. But there was no turning back now. I had to press on and uncover the secrets within. The interior was dark and damp, filled with a foul odor that made me feel nauseous. I turned on my phone's flashlight, forcing myself to look around. As I got closer, I saw strange devices hanging on the walls, along with old, dusty lab equipment scattered everywhere. A wave of unease washed over me as I realized this place had once been a laboratory, possibly conducting some unspeakable experiments. It felt like something horrific had happened here, filling me with sheer terror. I began to explore the building, searching for any possible exit. The oppressive environment suffocated me. The walls were plastered with bizarre blueprints covered in symbols and complex data I couldn't comprehend. They seemed to depict some terrifying experiment or history, making me feel uneasy, as if this place harbored a dreadful secret that quickened my heartbeat and kept me on high alert. Just then, I heard a noise from outside, as if something was approaching. The low, powerful growls echoed, feeling like a deadly prelude, sending a wave of foreboding through me, as if something ominous was about to happen. I held my breath, trying to remain silent, terrified of drawing attention. Peeking through the window, I cautiously looked outside and saw several blurry figures lurking around, accompanied by deep growls. They were slowly circling, seemingly searching for prey. My heart raced as I realized I might not be the only visitor here, and the creeping fear overwhelmed me, pressing down on my nerves and making me feel frantic. I continued searching for an exit within the building, filled with anxiety and unease, feeling trapped by an invisible weight. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash as the door was violently thrown open, and a massive creature burst in. Its skin was a sickly green, shimmering with a strange glow, and its eyes gleamed with a fierce, cunning light, like a predator locking onto its prey. My heart nearly leaped out of my chest, and terror froze me in place, as if I were trapped in frigid air. In the next moment, I desperately tried to escape, but there was no way out. In my despair, I turned and ran toward the window, the creature's growls echoing in my ears like a sharp knife, piercing my nerves and mocking my hopelessness. Just as I was about to reach the window, the creature's claws tore into my back, ripping my clothes and sending a wave of pain through me. My breathing quickened, and I felt a choking sensation. With all my strength, I leaped through the window, crashing onto the ground outside, gasping for breath as tears blurred my vision. The creature was right behind me, its breath hot against my back, like a shadow of death ready to consume me. I struggled to my feet, driven only by the instinct to survive, recklessly sprinting deeper into the forest, desperately hoping to escape this terrifying and eerie area. Taking a deep breath, I pressed on, knowing that my endless flight was just beginning. I was running desperately through the forest, my heart racing, the roar in my ears getting closer, like a death threat in the dark, warning me of the danger that was closing in. The trees flew past me, their branches scratching my face, stinging and bringing me back to my senses, reminding me to focus. I had no idea how far I had run. Time and space seemed to blur in front of my eyes. The surroundings no longer felt real. All I knew was that I had to escape that terrifying creature, driven forward by the primal instinct to survive, as if an invisible force was pushing me on. My legs began to feel weak, aching and exhausted, and my breathing grew rapid, a suffocating pressure building up as if the whole world was forcing me to stop. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't give up. I had to keep moving, searching for a glimmer of hope. Just when I was about to give up, I suddenly saw a clearing ahead. My heart raced as I dashed out, looking for cover, but all around me was still dense forest. Complete escape seemed out of reach, with nowhere to hide, and despair washed over me like a tidal wave, leaving me feeling utterly helpless. I stopped, filled with despair and helplessness. The environment around me seemed to mock my weakness. Just then, I heard a low growl coming from the thicket, the sound pressing down on me like steel, warning me not to approach that creature. My heart tightened as I realized it was getting closer, its massive body and terrifying presence advancing step by step, forcing me into a corner. I desperately searched for a way out, my mind a jumble, the trees around me shifting and changing, making it feel impossible to find a way. Time seemed to freeze in that moment, plunging me into the abyss of fear, as if my ability to think had been stolen away. Just when I was about to lose hope, I noticed a narrow path ahead, seemingly leading deeper into the forest, where I might find some unknown safety. My heart raced. Despite my hesitation, I decided to take the risk. This narrow, unknown path might be dangerous, but in this unfamiliar environment, I had to look for any possible escape, no matter how perilous the journey might be. I ran down the path, filled with fear and unease. The surroundings grew increasingly eerie, the branches swaying in the breeze, whispering softly, as if hinting that someone was watching me from behind, ready to swallow me whole. I felt a wave of discomfort, as if something was lurking in the shadows, and a sense of threat washed over me, signaling the dire situation I was about to face. I kept running, my heart pounding with fear, when suddenly I heard a loud crash behind me. The creature seemed to have discovered my presence. My heart raced, and I pushed myself to run faster, trying to shake it off. Just as I was nearing the end of the path, I tripped over a tree root and fell heavily to the ground, my vision going dark as I nearly lost consciousness. The calm around me shattered in an instant, and pain surged through my body, every nerve screaming. I felt a sharp pain, my body losing the strength to move, despair and fear intertwining, dulling my thoughts as if I were bound by invisible shackles. But just when I was at my lowest, the creature suddenly appeared before me, its enormous body casting a shadow over me, suffocating me with its presence. Its eyes gleamed with a fierce light, its mouth opening to reveal sharp teeth, seemingly ready to devour me. I couldn't move, filled with terror and despair, bracing for death, silently praying for a miracle. However, in that moment of despair, I suddenly heard a loud bang. The creature was knocked back by an incredible force, crashing to the ground. I opened my eyes to see a squad of soldiers rushing in, dressed in uniforms, weapons in hand, their expressions determined as they fired at the creature, providing me with a glimmer of hope and a chance for survival. The creature roared in anger, trying to fight back, but the soldiers' firepower suppressed it, preventing it from advancing. I felt dizzy, my consciousness fading as I was enveloped by a powerful force, eventually falling into a deep sleep, longing to escape this terrifying reality in my dreams, hoping for a different world when I woke up, yearning for a fresh start. I woke up from unconsciousness to find myself lying in a dimly lit room, surrounded by cold metal walls, the air thick with the pungent smell of chemicals, making me feel uneasy. I tried to sit up, but my body felt completely drained, as if every muscle had been sucked dry. My mind was still filled with the terrifying memories of what had just happened, leaving me anxious and nearly unable to think. I looked around and realized I was locked in a laboratory, the walls lined with complex equipment and instruments, flickering with a cold light. Papers and blueprints were scattered across the table, the writing indecipherable. In this bizarre environment, I struggled to remember what had happened, filled with confusion and unease. Why was I here? Who were those soldiers? What had I really gone through? As I pondered these questions, the door swung open, and a man in a white lab coat walked in, his face serious and cold. "You're awake," he said flatly, his voice deep and emotionless. "We need to talk about your experience in the restricted area." Those words hit me like a ton of bricks, sending a wave of unease and fear through me. My heart raced as I realized I might be caught up in a huge conspiracy. I tried to ask him what was going on, but he offered no explanation, only commanding me to follow him with an authoritative tone. Feeling helpless and filled with questions, I had no choice but to follow, my heart racing as if I were being pulled into an unfathomable vortex. We walked out of the lab, the hallway filled with the sharp smell of chemicals, the walls plastered with various experimental data and charts, showing incomprehensible results. My unease grew as I felt I was heading toward an unknown abyss, the path ahead seemingly endless, the fear intensifying with every step, doubts flooding my mind. We passed through several doors and finally entered a spacious room where several uniformed military personnel sat. Their faces were serious, expressions grim, their gazes piercing as if they were assessing me, the outsider, evaluating my identity and worth. Being under their scrutiny made me even more anxious, and an ominous premonition rose within me. "What you saw in the restricted area should never be known by anyone," one of the officers said, his tone low and authoritative. "We are conducting some secret experiments, and you inadvertently wandered into our territory." His words startled me, making me realize I might have stumbled upon something that shouldn't have been revealed, instantly understanding the gravity of the situation. "Those creatures are products of our experiments," the officer continued, a hint of pride and coldness in his voice. "They were created to study the limits and fears of humanity. You are the first person to escape the restricted area, and we need you to provide more information to better understand the results of the experiments." A wave of fear washed over me. Those creatures were human experiments? Was I just another test subject? I tried to resist, but ultimately fell silent, engulfed by deep despair and helplessness, as if an invisible hand had tightly bound me, leaving me unable to break free. "We won't harm you, but you must cooperate," the officer said coldly, his tone carrying an undeniable threat. "Otherwise, you will face harsher consequences." His words cut through the last defenses of my mind, filling me with despair as I realized I had fallen into a bottomless pit. My fate was in their hands, and all I could do was accept it, an overwhelming sense of fear and trapped despair building up within me, ready to explode at any moment. Despite my desperate attempts to escape, I was eventually caught. In just a few days, my life turned upside down. The peaceful days I once knew were now shrouded in fear and despair. I was forced to confront the terrifying truth about those creatures, realizing the depths of human greed and the limits of science. In the following days, I was locked in a small room, subjected to round after round of questioning and testing. Each experiment filled me with immense fear and despair. I had no idea if I could ever escape this place and return to the old life that now felt like a distant memory. I began to reflect on my experiences in the Forbidden Zone, recalling the appearance and behavior of those creatures. They were products of human creation, yet they were imprisoned in the darkness of a lab, innocent victims of our ambitions. My heart was filled with anger and helplessness, realizing that in the pursuit of scientific progress, humanity had long crossed the moral line. "You must understand, our experiments are for a better future," A cold officer's voice echoed in the sterile room. Only through these experiments can we find a way for humanity to survive. Anger surged within me as I refused to accept this twisted logic. Human greed and desire had led us down the path of destruction, and I would not be a part of this conspiracy. I felt like a pawn in a game I didn't want to participate in, where the stakes were the essence of humanity. Just when despair was about to consume me, I suddenly heard voices from outside the door, rising in intensity as if a fierce argument was taking place. A spark of hope ignited in my heart. Perhaps this was my chance to escape. I gathered my courage, summoning the little strength I had left, and charged at the door, slamming it open and rushing into the corridor. Footsteps echoed behind me, a constant reminder of the danger I was in. My legs felt heavy, as if weighed down by lead, but I knew I couldn't stop. I sprinted down the corridor, my heart racing as I searched for a way out. Finally, a glimmer of light appeared ahead, a beacon of hope in the oppressive darkness. My heart raced with excitement as I desperately ran toward the light. But just as I was about to reach it, the footsteps behind me grew closer, instilling fear in me. A wave of despair washed over me as I realized I might not escape after all. I turned a corner, breathing heavily, and suddenly stopped in front of a large window. Outside was a world bathed in sunlight, a stark contrast to the cold lab that had imprisoned me. However, there was no door here, no way to flee this prison. Panic surged within me as I turned to face my pursuers, who were hot on my heels. "Stop!" a voice commanded sharply and authoritatively. The soldiers closed in, their expressions filled with determination and urgency. I could see the weapons in their hands. The harsh reality hit me like a tidal wave, and I was cornered with no way out. In that moment of despair, I frantically searched for something to use as a weapon or a means of escape. My eyes landed on a heavy metal chair bolted to the floor. It was heavy, but maybe I could create some chaos with it. I lunged forward, using all my strength to yank the chair free and hurled it toward the window, shattering the glass into a dazzling array of shards. The soldiers were taken aback, momentarily stunned by the chaos I had created. Seizing the opportunity, I dashed toward the broken window, feeling the sharp edges of glass cut into my skin as I plunged into the outside world. Fresh air rushed in, both exhilarating and terrifying. I was free, but I could already hear the soldiers shouting behind me. Their pursuit had not stopped. I landed hard on the ground, the impact shaking my body, but I endured the pain and got back up. The world around me became a blur of colors and sounds, the sunlight shining above me as I raced toward the building that had once held me captive. My instincts kicked in, guiding me through the unfamiliar terrain. I could hear the distant roar of engines and the commands of soldiers. They were regrouping, and I knew I had to put as much distance between us as possible. Fear propelled my legs, urging me to sprint through the thickening underbrush. The forest was alive with sounds. Leaves rustled, birds chirped happily, a stark contrast to the chaos I had just escaped. I ducked to avoid branches, leaped over fallen logs, my mind consumed with a desire for freedom and survival. I had to find a way to evade them, to disappear into this wilderness. As I ran deeper into the woods, I stumbled upon a narrow path that seemed to lead to the outside world. I paused, listening for any signs of pursuit. The soldiers' voices faded into the distance, and a glimmer of hope rose within me. Perhaps I could lose them in this vast forest. I dashed down the path, brambles scratching my legs as I pressed on. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. I focused, trying to calm the panic within me. I was alive, and that was enough. However, as I continued to run, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was as if the forest itself was observing my every move. I glanced back, half expecting to see soldiers emerging from the underbrush, but there was nothing. Just the silence of the woods, a occasionally broken by my hurried breaths. I pressed on, determined to widen the gap between myself and my captors. The path narrowed, and I felt the weight of exhaustion creeping into my bones. I knew I couldn't maintain this pace forever, but the instinct to survive pushed me forward. After what felt like hours of running, I finally found an open area. Sunlight bathed the warm ground, and I allowed myself to relax for a moment. Kneeling down, the cool earth offered some comfort as I closed my eyes and let the reality of my escape wash over me. But this peaceful moment was short-lived. I heard faint sounds in the distance, unmistakable engine rumblings, and the shouts of a crowd. They were still searching for me, and I had to keep moving. I couldn't afford to be caught again. I quickly scanned the clearing for possible hiding spots. To my right, a thicket of bushes offered some cover. I crawled toward it, anxiety churning in my stomach, and nestled into the dense foliage, praying it would be enough to conceal me. Lying there, my mind flooded with memories of the past. The experiments, those creatures, and the uniformed people, they all felt like an unreachable nightmare, yet my current reality was painfully real. I was alone, prey fighting for survival. The minutes of waiting felt like hours as I strained to hear any signs of soldiers. The sounds grew closer, and I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest. Shadows moved in the distance. The soldiers were scouring the clearing, their movements methodical and precise. Just when I thought they would find me, a loud explosion echoed through the forest, shaking the ground beneath me. The soldiers were startled by the noise, momentarily distracted, and I seized the opportunity to reignite my instinct to flee. I slowly crawled out from the bushes, silently making my way through the underbrush. I had no idea what had caused the explosion, but I knew it was my chance to escape. I followed the sounds of chaos, hoping to find a safe place. Navigating between the trees, I pushed aside branches, ducking under trunks, each step quickening my heartbeat. The soldiers' voices grew fainter as I delved deeper into the forest, excitement and fear mingling within me. I was free, but how long could this freedom last? Eventually, I reached a small stream, the cool water glistening in the sunlight. I crouched down, splashing my face and drinking deeply, the refreshing liquid reviving my weary body. I knew I had to keep moving, but in that moment, I allowed myself to savor the joy of being alive. Just as I stood to continue on, I heard rustling in the bushes behind me. My heart raced as I slowly turned, ready for the worst. But what appeared was a small deer, its big eyes curiously gazing at me. It reminded me of the beauty and fragility of life, a stark contrast to the horrors I had just escaped. I took a deep breath, grounding myself in the present. I needed to focus on survival and not let fear consume me. With renewed determination, I turned and continued deeper into the forest, my senses heightened, every sound amplified in the silence. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows on the ground, I knew I needed to find shelter for the night. By chance, I discovered a small cave, its entrance concealed by thick vines. This would do. I crawled inside, grateful for this momentary refuge, leaning against the cool stone walls. In the darkness of the cave, I allowed myself to think. I had escaped, but at what cost? The memories of the lab, those creatures, and the uniformed people lingered in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that my escape was just the beginning of something much larger. I closed my eyes, exhaustion finally taking over. As I drifted into a restless sleep, the morning sunlight filtered through the leaves, warming the ground and waking me up, driving away the darkness and dampness of the cave. Even though I felt uncomfortable, I knew I had to leave this place as soon as possible and continue my journey of escape. While I had found temporary shelter here, I understood that this safety wouldn't last long, and I could be discovered at any moment. I cautiously stepped out of the cave, the surrounding forest still quiet, with the occasional bird call breaking the morning stillness. I struggled to remember the route from last night, trying to find a safe direction. However, as time passed, I realized I was becoming more lost in this vast forest. Every step felt incredibly tiring, filled with anxiety and unease. I navigated between the trees, searching for familiar landmarks, but the scenery around me was like a fog, hazy and hard to distinguish. Doubts began to creep in, making me wonder if I could really escape or if this forest would become my grave, burying all my hopes and dreams. Every time I thought of this, a sense of powerlessness washed over me, deepening my despair. Just when I was overwhelmed with hopelessness, a low growl suddenly echoed in my ears. I stopped, my heart racing, looking around for the source of the sound. It grew closer, as if something terrifying was approaching me. My instincts told me that danger was near and could strike at any moment. I quickly searched for a place to hide, trying to escape the unknown threat. Just as I ducked into a thicket, a monster appeared before me. Its form was twisted, covered in black scales, with cunning and fierce eyes staring straight at me. My heart nearly stopped, fear crashing over me like a tidal wave, leaving me nowhere to run. The monster began to move closer, its low growl reverberating in the air, announcing my doom. I fought to suppress my fear, thinking of ways to escape, but the surroundings seemed to force me to face the harsh reality. Just then, I heard hurried footsteps in the distance, soldiers' voices mingling with the monster's growls, creating a chaotic and suffocating symphony. "Quick! It's right here," a soldier shouted, followed by the deafening sound of gunfire, which made me even more anxious. The monster, startled, turned and lunged at the soldiers, and a glimmer of hope surged within me. I knew this was my chance to escape, so I quickly ran in the opposite direction, silently urging myself to seize this opportunity. I darted through the forest, the shadows of the trees whizzing by me, as if guiding my escape. A flicker of hope ignited in my heart. I had finally shaken off my pursuers. However, as I pushed through the underbrush, my foot slipped, and I fell into a hidden pit, surrounded by dirt and branches that trapped me, leaving me helpless. I struggled desperately, but it was no use. Despair washed over me like a tidal wave, nearly suffocating me. Just when I thought all was lost, a sharp, acrid gas wafted through the air. I tried to hold my breath, but it was too late. A drowsy feeling hit me all at once. I felt my body losing control, my consciousness fading, and the world around me seemed to spin, as if everything was collapsing before my eyes. Just before I passed out, I faintly heard the hushed voices of several soldiers and hurried footsteps, a mix of fear and helplessness swirling inside me, the feeling of unavoidable despair wrapping around me like invisible shackles. Finally, in my haze, I saw a few soldiers enter my line of sight, their figures overlapping in front of me, both blurry and clear. I wanted to struggle, but my body wouldn't respond, as if bound by an invisible force. The soldiers surrounded me, their hurried movements and excited voices echoing in my ears, making it hard to breathe. "Grab her," one soldier shouted, and the others quickly moved in, easily overpowering me, as if I were just a toy in their hands. As my consciousness faded, I felt myself being dragged away, trapped again in darkness and despair, filled with hopelessness and helplessness. The hope and freedom I once had vanished in that moment. I knew I was trapped once more. In this laboratory, every detail was precisely designed and meticulously considered. The walls were a cold white, bright lights shone down from the ceiling, illuminating every corner. The air was thick with the smell of disinfectant, suffocating yet familiar to me. Today, my subject was a young woman who had been fleeing in the forest and was captured by our soldiers. Her body looked weak as she was dragged into the lab, her face filled with fear and despair. The glimmer of survival in her eyes was evident, but I knew that desire meant nothing here. She had become the subject of scientific research, and I was the one leading this process. "Recording starts," I said into the recording device, my voice clear and calm. Subject ID, X47, gender, female, age, approximately 25. Captured in the forest area, unstable condition, showing signs of psychological panic. Her struggles seemed futile to me. No matter how much she resisted, I had already set the steps of the experiment. My goal was to observe her psychological and physiological responses to reveal the true nature of humanity under the influence of a new type of combat drug. Human suffering and struggle were at the core of my research. "Please let me go!" Her voice was filled with despair, trying to awaken my inner compassion with words. But I had no intention of being swayed by emotions. The rationality and coldness of science were the truths I pursued. Her pleas were like a gentle breeze to my ears, brushing by without touching any chord within me. "Experiment starts," I continued, pressing the button on the control panel to initiate the first test program. The room's lights dimmed instantly, and the surrounding equipment began to operate, emitting a low hum. Her body trembled slightly on the operating table, clearly terrified of what was about to happen. I observed her reactions, filled with anticipation. The first step of the experiment was to monitor her physiological state. As the instruments powered up, data began to flicker on the screen. Her heart rate skyrocketed, her breathing became rapid, and the tension in her body was laid bare before me. "X47, relax your body, stay calm." I spoke to her in a calm tone, even though I knew it wouldn't help her fear. The light of terror flickered in her eyes, as if she saw death approaching before me. "You won't understand," she suddenly shouted, her voice filled with anger and despair. "You're just a cold-blooded monster." "Whether I'm cold-blooded or not doesn't matter," I replied, my tone still calm. "What matters is the data. We must understand how humans react under the influence of this new combat drug. It's crucial for the advancement of science." As the experiment progressed, I gradually adjusted its intensity, applying small stimuli to observe her physiological responses. Her body writhed in pain, her uncontrollable struggles brought me a sense of satisfaction. The limits of humanity were revealed in such suffering. "Please, don't," her voice weakened, as if begging me to stop all of this. But I knew stopping wasn't my choice. The pursuit of science was ruthless, and I had to persist. As the experiment continued, her condition gradually deteriorated. The acceleration of her heart rate and rapid breathing intertwined, forming a suffocating atmosphere. Her consciousness began to blur in pain, and the light in her eyes started to fade, as if showing me her despair and helplessness. "Data recording complete," I said to the device. Every successful experiment came with a hint of loneliness. I knew this was the price of the experiment, but I had to continue. "Please, let me go," her voice rang out again, filled with a faint plea. At that moment, she was no longer a strong individual, but a soul crushed by the relentless reality. The anger in her eyes was replaced by a desire to survive. "Experiment continues," I said calmly, pressing the button on the control panel to start the second test program. A tense atmosphere filled the air, as if time itself froze at that moment. Her body began to react violently under the influence of the instruments, and her pained moans echoed in the lab. As time passed, her resistance gradually weakened, and her consciousness kept fading. Her body struggled in pain and despair, ultimately consumed by the merciless reality. Just as I prepared to record her physiological data, suddenly, her body began to show abnormal reactions, her heart rate plummeting, and her breathing becoming weak. "Record abnormal situation." I quickly adjusted the instruments. Her body was losing control in intense pain, and her consciousness completely collapsed at that moment. "Please, don't," her voice echoed one last time, but this time, she was too weak to fight back. Her body twisted in agony, ultimately plunging into endless darkness. I quietly watched her figure gradually disappear, the lab's equipment still running, data still flowing, yet her life came to a sudden halt at that moment. Recording ends, I said to the device. The success or failure of the experiment felt insignificant at that moment. As the experiment concluded, I turned off the equipment and walked out of the lab, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant, sharp and suffocating. Even though I continually moved forward in the pursuit of science, none of it mattered. Perhaps this was the cost of science, cold and ruthless. It was supposed to be an unforgettable camping trip, a thrilling escape into the wild heart of Wisconsin, just me and my close-knit group of friends, Jake, Mia, and Sam. We had meticulously planned this getaway for weeks, eagerly looking forward to a break from the daily grind of our busy lives. The anticipation of immersing ourselves in nature, of breathing the fresh air and experiencing the tranquility of the woods, was palpable. However, little did we know that this trip, which we thought would strengthen our bonds and create lasting memories, would instead unravel into a nightmare that would haunt us for the rest of our lives. The first day started off filled with nothing but laughter and excitement as we set up our tents beside the shimmering lake, its waters glistening under the golden sunlight. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a warm and inviting glow over the green canopy of the forest surrounding us. We spent the afternoon hiking, exploring the dense woods, and sharing amusing stories around the crackling campfire. As the day transitioned into night, the air turned crisp, giving us a refreshing chill, while the stars twinkled brilliantly overhead. Everything felt perfect, idyllic even, but beneath the surface of our happiness, an unsettling tension began to brew, lurking just outside our consciousness. Then came the second night, a night we would never forget. A thick fog rolled in unexpectedly, enveloping our campsite in a ghostly shroud that obscured our surroundings and gripped us with a sense of foreboding. This was not just any fog. It was unlike any I had encountered before, heavy, suffocating, and it seemed to whisper secrets as it crept closer, wrapping around us like a predator. I soon found myself struggling to see just a few feet in front of me, and an instinctual fear began to claw at my chest, urging me to retreat to safety. We should stay close together, I suggested, forcing my voice to break through the oppressive silence, though it trembled slightly under the weight of my unease. Jake shrugged it off dismissively. "It's just fog, man. Nothing to worry about." "It'll pass," he said, sounding more confident than he felt. But even he couldn't completely hide the unease that flickered in his eyes. We huddled tightly around the fire, the flames dancing and flickering wildly as if they too were frightened of the encroaching darkness that threatened to engulf us. The eerie atmosphere settled heavily around us, and as the night wore on, my gaze settled on something strange about Tom. He had always been the life of the party, the one who could always make us laugh, but now he sat apart from us, staring intently into the fog as it billowed ominously around him, an intensity in his expression that made my skin crawl with discomfort. "Tom, you okay?" Mia asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, almost drowned out by the encroaching fog. He didn't respond at all, his gaze fixated on the swirling mist as if he were listening, intently, to something we couldn't perceive. With every passing moment, the atmosphere grew heavier, the fog thickening around us, and my heart raced uncontrollably. I glanced nervously at the shadows flickering between the trees, feeling an unsettling sensation that they were alive, watching us with hidden intent. In an effort to lighten the mood, Sam attempted to make a joke, but it fell completely flat in the oppressive silence. The shallow laughter that followed felt hollow, reverberating into the void of the fog that surrounded us. Then, suddenly, a rustling sound broke the silence, drawing our collective attention. We all turned to see a pair of glowing eyes staring at us from the underbrush, and my breath caught in my throat as a low growl echoed ominously through the still night air. "What the hell is that?" I whispered, my voice trembling as fear settled in the pit of my stomach. "It's probably just a deer," Jake said, attempting to sound unconcerned, but the tremor in his voice gave away the fear he was trying to mask. The creature stepped into the dim light, revealing itself to be ominously larger than a deer. Its silhouette was monstrous, silhouetted against the mist, and its eyes were filled with an unnatural hunger that sent shivers down my spine. Before we could react appropriately, it vanished back into the fog, leaving us stunned and speechless in the disorienting silence. "Did you see that?" I gasped, my heart pounding wildly in my chest as adrenaline coursed through me. "Yeah, I did," Tom finally spoke, his voice eerily calm and unsettling. "It's just a part of the forest. It's always watching. Always waiting." His words sent a chilling shiver down my spine, confirming my worst fears. Something was terribly off with him, and I could feel the tension rising like a palpable force among us. We all agreed, albeit reluctantly, to turn in for the night, hoping foolishly that the morning light would chase away the horrors lurking just beyond our campsite in the fog. But sleep didn't come easily for any of us. I tossed and turned in my tent, unable to find comfort as I was haunted by the growl and the fear that Tom had begun to exhibit. I could hear the haunting whispers of the fog outside, wrapping around our campsite like a shroud, draping over the tranquility we once felt. At some point during the night, I must have finally drifted off into a fitful sleep, only to be jolted awake by a commotion rising outside my tent. I scrambled out of my tent in a panic, my heart racing, only to find Mia and Sam standing close to the fire, their faces pale and drawn. "Where's Tom?" Mia asked, her voice laced with panic, searching for any indication of our missing friend. "He was right here with us," I replied, dread welling up inside me as my stomach sank. "He must have gone for a walk or something." "Are you kidding me?" "It's dangerous out there," Sam exclaimed, glancing nervously at the fog that seemed to pulse ominously. We started calling out for Tom, our voices echoing into the night, but only the fog answered, wrapping around us like a living thing that thrived on our fear. The air felt electric, charged with a malevolent energy, and I could sense that something was terribly wrong, something far beyond our understanding. "Let's split up and look for him," I suggested, although the thought terrified me and made my own skin crawl. We reluctantly agreed to the plan, each taking a flashlight and venturing into the thick fog that enveloped our campsite. I felt a knot tightening in my stomach as I stepped away from the safety of the dwindling firelight, the darkness swallowing me whole as I moved deeper into the eerie silence. I called out for Tom, my voice trembling as I forced myself to push deeper into the oppressive woods. The trees loomed overhead like ancient sentinels, their branches twisting and curling like skeletal fingers reaching for me. The fog clung to my skin, chilling me to the bone, and I could barely see a few feet ahead, the shadows playing tricks on my mind. Every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of adrenaline coursing through me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched by eyes lurking in the dark. Minutes turned into hours, and a sense of hopelessness began to creep in, slowly engulfing me. The fog thickened around me, distorting my sense of direction and time. I stumbled through the underbrush, calling Tom's name repeatedly, but the only response was the eerie and unsettling silence of the forest that felt alive in its stillness. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further in my search, I heard a faint sound, a whisper carried on the cold wind. "Help me." It was Tom's voice, barely audible but unmistakable. My heart leaped in my chest, elation quickly replaced by trepidation as I followed the sound, my desperation driving me forward with a mix of hope and fear. The fog parted slightly as I reached a small clearing, my heart racing as I took in the scene before me. There, I found Tom standing motionless, his back turned to me, seemingly entranced. "Tom!" I shouted, relief flooding through me at the sight of him. But to my dismay, he didn't respond or even turn around. As I approached, a wave of dread washed over me, chilling me to the core. He was staring into the abyss of darkness, his expression blank and lifeless as if he had lost all sense of self. "Tom, please, what's wrong?" I pleaded, reaching out in an attempt to touch his shoulder, to bring him back to reality. But the moment my hand made contact with him, he spun around abruptly, causing me to recoil in horror. His eyes were wide, filled with a darkness that seemed to swallow the light around us. "They're coming for us," he whispered, his voice hollow and lacking the warmth I had always known. "Who's coming?" I asked, my voice wavering as I desperately sought some clarity. "The ones in the fog," he replied, his gaze drifting back toward the shadows that writhed in the mist. "They want us to join them. They're hungry for our souls." Panic surged within me as dread gripped my heart, and I turned to run back to safety, but the fog closed in around us, thick and suffocating like a tightening vice. "Tom, we need to get back," I shouted, but he remained rooted in place, entranced, as if something unseen was pulling him deeper into the darkness. I grabbed his arm in a desperate attempt to pull him away, but he resisted with a strange strength. "You don't understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's beautiful. You can't fight it. Just let go." In that moment of shock, I realized I was losing him. The friend I had known and cherished was slowly slipping away, swallowed by the malevolent force that lurked within the fog. I felt a surge of fear and desperation, and with every ounce of strength I could muster, I pulled him back, trying to save him from whatever had taken hold of his mind. "Tom, snap out of it!" I yelled, shaking him with urgency as my heart raced in fear of losing him forever. His eyes flickered for just a moment, and I saw a glimmer of recognition in them, a brief flash of the person I knew. What's happening?" he stammered, confusion washing over his face like a wave, as if he was just waking up from a terrible nightmare. Before I could respond, a low growl echoed through the clearing, causing the very air to thicken with anticipation and dread. The shadows shifted ominously, and I could see shapes moving within the fog, dark figures with glowing eyes, closing in on us with purpose. "Run!" I shouted, urgency lacing my words as I dragged Tom with me, stumbling back through the dark woods, adrenaline surging as we fought against the encroaching doom. The fog seemed to pursue us, a relentless entity that felt like it was breathing down our necks, urging us to surrender. I could hear the whispers growing louder, a sinister chorus calling for us, tempting us to stop, to give in to despair. We burst into the small clearing where Mia and Sam were still searching for us, their faces lighting up with a mixture of hope and sorrow. "Thank God! We thought we lost you," Mia exclaimed, relief washing over her features, but her relief quickly turned to horror as she saw Tom's expression. "Something's wrong with him," Sam shouted, stepping back instinctively in fear, his eyes wide with dread. I tried desperately to explain, to convey the horror we had witnessed, but the fog was closing in fast, wrapping around us like a vice. "We need to leave, now," I urged frantically, but the fear in their eyes mirrored my own despair. The shadows danced at the edges of the clearing, and the whispers grew louder, drowning out our voices and filling the air with a sense of doom. "They're coming," Tom murmured again, his eyes glazing over, slipping into that otherworldly state once more. "Tom, no!" I screamed, my voice cracking under the strain of our loss, but he was slipping away again, lost to the fog and the horrors within. I felt a surge of anger and fear flooding my veins, and I pushed him away, desperate to break the hold it had on him. "Fight it, Tom! You have to fight it!" I pleaded, but he was already retreating back into the thick fog, the darkness consuming him bit by bit. Mia and Sam grabbed my arms, pulling me back as the shadows began to close in around us, suffocating us with their malevolence. "We can't lose him!" I yelled in desperation, but the fog was too thick, and the whispers grew louder still, drowning out my cries for our friend as we were engulfed in despair. In a moment of pure desperation, I lunged into the fog, reaching out for Tom with every ounce of strength left within me. I felt a cold hand grasp mine, pulling me deeper into the abyss, the darkness wrapping around me like a shroud. The world around me twisted and warped in surreal ways, and I could hear the whispers beckoning me closer, enticing me with a dark promise. "Join us," they hissed, a disconcerting chorus of voices that filled my mind, drowning out my thoughts. I fought against it with everything I had, clawing my way back to the surface, but the darkness was relentless and seemingly alive, consuming my will to resist. Just as I thought I would be consumed completely by the swirling mist, I broke free, collapsing onto the forest floor, gasping for breath. The fog receded slightly, and I could see Mia and Sam standing nearby, their faces etched with fear and concern. "Where's Tom?" I gasped, panic clawing at my throat as a new wave of dread washed over me. "We don't know," Mia cried, her voice trembling as tears brimmed in her eyes. "He just vanished into thin air, like he was just taken." The brutal realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Tom was gone, swallowed by the very darkness we had sought to escape all along, and I felt the weight of our loss crushing me. The fog began to close in again, and I instinctively knew we had to leave quickly before it claimed another victim. We stumbled back to our campsite, the fire still flickering weakly against the encroaching fog that threatened to extinguish its light. As we gathered our things in a daze, I could feel the weight of despair settling over us like a dark cloud, heavy and suffocating. The laughter and joy we had shared just one day earlier felt like a distant memory, replaced now by an overwhelming silence that echoed the void town left behind. As we packed our belongings in a hurried panic, I couldn't shake the insistent feeling that we were being watched, the weight of unseen eyes upon us. The shadows around the clearing seemed to whisper our names, reeling us in and calling us back into the darkness we desperately sought to escape. I glanced back at the forest, knowing in my heart that Tom was lost to us, a victim of the malevolent force that lurked within the fog, and I felt an overwhelming wave of grief wash over me. With heavy hearts and racing minds, we finally made our way back to the car, the crushing weight of our loss hanging over us like a shroud, an unshakable reminder of our failure to protect him. The fog followed us, a haunting reminder of the horrors we had faced only moments before. As we drove away from the campsite, I couldn't help but glance back at the forest, knowing that the darkness was still there, lying in wait for its next victims, ready to feast on innocence when the time was right. In the end, what was intended to be an adventure had turned into a harrowing nightmare, a chilling reminder of the fragility of friendship and the unknown terrors that lurk just beyond the veil of our perceived reality. The whispers of the fog would haunt us forever, embedding themselves in our minds like a dark echo, a testament to the evil that dwells in the heart of the wilderness, watching, waiting, and hungry endlessly for more souls to claim. I never believed in curses or the supernatural. My life had been rooted in logic, reason, and the mundane, the predictable patterns of everyday existence. I found comfort in the tangible, in what could be seen and understood. But everything changed the summer my daughter, Joni, returned home from camp, forever altering my perception of reality. That summer was supposed to be filled with laughter, joy, and cherished memories, but it quickly spiraled into a nightmare that I still can't shake off, a haunting that lingers in the corners of my mind. Joni had always been a vibrant child, full of life, curiosity, and an insatiable thirst for adventure. She was excited about her summer camp experience, her eyes sparkling with the promise of new friends and thrilling activities. I remember the day we dropped her off, her laughter echoing in my ears as she ran off to join her friends, her little backpack bouncing against her back. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, thinking she would be safe and happy for the next few weeks, enjoying the summer sun and the freedom of childhood. When she returned, however, something was unmistakably off. It started with a cough, just a small, dry cough that I initially brushed aside, attributing it to the result of the summer heat or perhaps a common cold. I thought it was nothing to worry about, a minor inconvenience that would soon pass. But as the days passed, her cough grew more persistent, evolving into something more sinister, and I began to notice something horrifying. Each time she coughed, she would bring up small, writhing insects. At first, they were just a few ants, harmless and insignificant, but soon it escalated to larger creatures, beetles, crickets, and even moths, their tiny bodies squirming in the air, a grotesque display that left me paralyzed with fear. I watched in horror as my once healthy daughter suffered, her laughter replaced by a haunting silence. I took her to the doctor, who seemed baffled by her condition, his brow furrowed in confusion. "It's probably just a respiratory infection," he said, prescribing some medication that felt like a feeble attempt to address a deep-rooted problem. But the pills did nothing. Joni's health deteriorated rapidly, slipping through my fingers like sand. She was losing weight, her cheeks hollowing out, and the cough became a constant, haunting presence in our home, echoing through the hallways like a ghost. As a father, I felt utterly helpless, trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I tried to comfort her, to assure her that everything would be all right, but deep down, I was terrified, my heart heavy with dread. I remember one night, sitting by her bedside, listening to her labored breaths, the sound of her struggle piercing my soul. I could hear the faint sound of her cough, a chilling reminder of her suffering. Each time she coughed, it felt as if something within her was trying to escape, clawing its way out, and I was powerless to intervene. Then, one evening, Joni's mother, Sarah, began to cough too. I watched in horror as she mirrored our daughter's symptoms, the same dry cough, the same writhing insects. It was as if a malevolent force was spreading through our family, targeting the ones I loved most, and I felt a sense of dread enveloping our home, turning it into a prison of fear. The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating me with the weight of impending doom. Desperate for answers, I began to investigate, driven by a primal instinct to protect my family. I remembered the camp where Joni had spent her summer, nestled near an old, forgotten graveyard, shrouded in rumors and whispers of dark magic. The locals spoke of a witch who had once lived there, a woman shunned by the community for her strange practices and eerie abilities. They said she had cursed the land, and anyone who dared to disturb her resting place would suffer her wrath, a fate I was now beginning to fear. As I delved deeper into the lore, I uncovered stories of children who had fallen ill after attending that camp, their symptoms eerily similar to Joni's. I felt a chill run down my spine as I pieced together the horrifying puzzle. The camp wasn't just a place for fun and games, it was a gateway to something far more sinister, a portal to darkness that had ensnared my family in its grip. With each passing day, Joni's condition worsened, and I could see the life draining from her, her vibrant spirit flickering like a dying flame. There was nothing I could do to stop it. I held her hand as she lay in the hospital bed, her frail body barely recognizable, a shell of the girl I once knew. I begged her to fight, to hold on, but deep down, I knew we were losing her, slipping away like the last rays of sunlight at dusk. The night she passed away was the darkest moment of my life, a void that swallowed me whole. I felt as if the world had come crashing down around me, leaving me in a chasm of despair. The doctors tried to console me, their words falling on deaf ears, mere echoes in the vast emptiness of my grief. All I could think about was the curse that had taken my daughter away, the malevolence that had invaded our lives. I was consumed by grief, anger, and an overwhelming sense of guilt. I should have protected her. I should have done something, anything, to save her. But the nightmare didn't end there. Sarah's condition continued to deteriorate, mirroring Joni's decline in a cruel twist of fate. I watched in horror as the same insects began to plague her, the same hollow cough echoing through our home, a haunting reminder of what we had lost. It felt like a cruel twist of fate, as if the curse had claimed another victim, and I was powerless to stop it. The walls of our home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage, trapping us in a web of despair. In my search for answers, I decided to confront the graveyard, the source of my growing dread. I needed to know the truth, to face whatever dark force had invaded our lives and taken so much from us. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and my resolve, I ventured into the depths of the graveyard one stormy night, the air thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder that echoed my inner turmoil. As I wandered among the crumbling headstones, I felt a chilling presence surrounding me, a weight that pressed down on my chest. Shadows danced in the corners of my vision, whispering secrets I couldn't understand, their voices a cacophony of despair. I stumbled upon an ancient grave, overgrown with weeds and forgotten by time. The name etched into the stone sent a shiver down my spine, Evelyn, the witch. I felt a surge of anger and desperation, a primal urge to confront the source of my suffering. How could one woman's curse wreak such havoc on my family? I clutched the gravestone, demanding answers, begging for mercy, my voice rising in a crescendo of emotion. But the wind howled around me, and I could feel the darkness closing in, wrapping around me like a shroud. In that moment, I realized that I was not just seeking answers, I was challenging a force far beyond my comprehension, a darkness that had been waiting for me. Suddenly, the ground beneath me trembled, and I was thrown backward, landing hard on the cold, damp earth. I gasped for breath as the shadows coiled around me, whispering in a language I couldn't decipher, a sinister chant that filled the air with dread. I felt a cold hand grip my heart, squeezing the life out of me, and panic surged through me as I struggled to escape the clutches of the darkness. In the chaos, I caught a glimpse of something, a figure standing at the edge of the graveyard, watching me with eyes that glowed with an otherworldly light. It was a woman, her presence both alluring and repulsive, drawing me in while simultaneously instilling a deep terror within me. She was Evelyn, the witch, and I knew in that moment that I was face to face with the source of our suffering, the embodiment of the curse that had ravaged my family. "Why have you come here?" she asked, her voice echoing like a distant thunderclap, reverberating through the air. "Do you seek to break the curse?" I nodded, my voice trembling, barely a whisper. "Please, I beg you. My family is suffering. I want to save them." My heart raced as I spoke, the weight of desperation heavy on my shoulders. Evelyn's laughter echoed through the graveyard, a sound that sent chills down my spine, a cruel reminder of my powerlessness. "You cannot save them," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "The curse is eternal. It binds the living to the dead, and only through sacrifice can it be lifted." I felt a wave of despair wash over me, drowning me in hopelessness. "What kind of sacrifice? What do you want from me?" My voice cracked as I struggled to comprehend the gravity of her words. Her eyes glinted with malice, a predatory gleam that sent shivers down my spine. One must take the place of another. A life for a life. In that moment, I understood the weight of her words, the horrifying truth that lay before me. To save my wife, I would have to offer my own life as a cruel trade. I felt a deep conflict within me, a battle between love and survival. I had already lost Joni. Could I bear to lose Sarah too? But the thought of living without them, of being alone in a world devoid of their light, was unbearable. As I stood there, grappling with the choice before me, the darkness began to close in again, suffocating me with its presence. I could hear Joni's laughter, fading into a haunting echo, and Sarah's cough resonating in my mind, a chilling reminder of my impending loss. I realized that I was trapped in a cycle of despair, and the only way to break free was to confront the very thing that haunted me, the darkness that threatened to consume us all. With a newfound resolve, I faced Evelyn, my heart racing with determination. "I will do it. I will sacrifice myself to save my family." My voice rang with conviction, a desperate plea for redemption. Her smile widened, revealing sharp teeth that glinted in the darkness. Very well. The choice is made. In an instant, the shadows enveloped me, pulling me into a void of darkness that swallowed me whole. I felt my life force draining away, a coldness seeping into my bones, numbing my senses. But as I surrendered to the darkness, I felt a flicker of hope, a glimmer of light in the abyss. Perhaps I could save them, perhaps I could break the curse that had haunted us. And then, everything went black, a suffocating darkness that enveloped me completely. When I awoke, I was in my living room, surrounded by the familiar warmth of home. The sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow on the walls, illuminating the space with a comforting light. I felt disoriented, as if I had just awakened from a long nightmare, my mind struggling to grasp reality. But then I heard it, the sound of laughter, a melody that filled my heart with hope. I rushed to the source, my heart pounding in my chest, a mixture of fear and anticipation coursing through me. There, in the backyard, were Joni and Sarah, playing together as if nothing had ever happened, their laughter ringing like chimes in the breeze. I stood frozen, disbelief washing over me like a tidal wave. Had I truly broken the curse? Had I saved them from the clutches of darkness? But as I watched them, the laughter began to fade, replaced by a chilling silence that sent a shiver down my spine. I felt a cold breeze sweep through the yard, and the shadows began to creep back in, wrapping around me like a shroud. I realized with horror that I had not escaped the curse, I had merely become a part of it, a pawn in a game I could never hope to win. In that moment, I understood the true cost of my sacrifice. I was bound to the shadows, forever trapped in a cycle of despair, my soul entwined with the darkness that had claimed my family. As I watched my loved ones laugh and play, I felt the darkness closing in around me, whispering secrets I could never escape, promises of torment that would haunt me for eternity. I was lost, a prisoner of my own making, forever entwined in the web of my choices. And as the shadows whispered my name, I knew that the curse would never truly be lifted. I was now a part of the whispering shadows, forever haunted by the choices I had made, a specter of my former self, trapped in a nightmare that would never end. One crisp autumn evening, I found myself stepping into that long-abandoned factory that once buzzed with artistic energy and creativity. It had served as a vibrant hub for local artists, a place where imagination ran wild and inspiration flowed freely. However, now it lay in ruins, deserted and forgotten, slowly transforming into a rumored haunt for restless spirits and ghosts. The air was thick with an eerie, mysterious atmosphere that sent a shiver racing down my spine. Despite the nagging sense of unease gnawing at me, I felt an irresistible urge to explore the depths of this place and uncover some of the forgotten secrets that lingered within its walls. As soon as I crossed the threshold into the factory, I was greeted by faint, almost imperceptible voices. At first, I thought it was merely some leftover speaker from an old art installation, oddly floating in the expansive emptiness of the space. I began to wander through the remnants of tattered canvases and scattered paint cans, and as I moved deeper into the factory, the voices grew closer and more distinct, making my heart race with a mix of excitement and apprehension. The sounds seemed to transcend mere random noise. They shifted from low murmurs to sharp, piercing whispers, almost as if they were trying to tell a story. Gradually, I came to the unsettling realization that these voices were not emanating from any electrical device or recording. Instead, they felt more like the whispers of some unknown creature, beckoning me, calling my name, and luring me deeper into the enveloping darkness of the factory. As I delved further into the labyrinthine corridors of the factory, I stumbled upon a rusty iron door that led underground, with a faint, flickering light seeping through the cracks. A surge of fear welled up inside me, but an indescribable curiosity compelled me to push the door open and descend the narrow staircase. Each step felt like I was walking on my own heartbeat, the echoes of my movements bouncing around the dimly lit corridor. With every step, the whispers grew clearer, as if they were revealing that this place held secrets far beyond mere artistic expression. Finally, I reached the basement, and what I encountered completely shattered my previous perceptions of the factory. The walls were adorned with bizarre, twisted paintings that seemed to chronicle some indescribable pain and despair, reflecting the inner turmoil of the artists who once inhabited this space. In the center of the room stood a massive tank, its surface still and reflective like a mirror, yet exuding a suffocating and putrid odor that filled the air. Deep within the tank, I sensed a powerful force churning, as if something was lying dormant, waiting to awaken. Just at that moment, I heard those whispers again, almost as if a creature was attempting to communicate with me directly. "Come on, come home," they said softly yet eerily, their words wrapping around me like a shroud. Those haunting phrases echoed in my mind, filling me with an indescribable sense of fear and foreboding. As time passed and I lingered in that eerie basement, I began to realize that these voices might be intricately connected to the missing persons cases I had heard about in the village. Many people from the community had mysteriously disappeared over the years, and before their vanishings, it seemed they all had experienced those same haunting whispers. I started to question whether this was merely a hallucination or if I was grappling with some bizarre reality. My thoughts drifted to a legendary shaman whose grandson lived nearby. Perhaps he could help unravel this perplexing crisis that had ensnared me. Determined to seek answers, I found the shaman and shared my chilling experiences with him. He listened intently, his gaze revealing a complex and mysterious emotion that made me feel both understood and vulnerable. He explained that these whispers were actually manifestations of an ancient creature, capable of mimicking human voices, trying to lure the innocent and unsuspecting closer to its grasp. He described the essence of these beings, not merely evil entities, but rather reflections of the complex and often fraught relationship between humans and nature. As he spoke, I felt my inner turmoil begin to settle, although the fear of the unknown still lingered like a shadow in my mind. He advised me that when facing these creatures, we shouldn't resort to violence or aggression. Instead, we should learn to listen, understand, and respect the warnings that nature offers. Eventually, I felt an inexplicable force urging me to return to that basement and confront the source of those haunting voices once and for all. Back in the abandoned factory, the air felt heavy and oppressive, and the whispers surrounded me like a thick fog. I knew I had to face them, to uncover the truth hidden within those walls. As I stood before the ominous tank, feeling that force intensify within me, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. Its form twisted and writhed like a shadow, attempting to seep into my very soul. But this time, I didn't back down or flee. I listened intently to those voices, striving to grasp their true intent. They didn't want to harm me. Rather, they wanted me to perceive some hidden truth that lay beyond my understanding. I closed my eyes, allowing myself to immerse fully in their whispers, and gradually, I began to see the figures of the missing people. They hadn't vanished into thin air. They had been guided by these creatures, becoming part of their world. The shadows shared their tranquility and sorrow with me, embodying the deep and complex bond that exists between humanity and nature. In that pivotal moment, I understood my mission. I was not just a passive observer. I had a responsibility to share these stories with the world. Through my connection with these beings, I realized the importance of cherishing our time in harmony with nature and valuing every single life that exists. Ultimately, I emerged from the basement, where darkness and light intertwined, carrying with me a profound understanding and a sense of responsibility that weighed heavily on my heart. After that life-altering experience, even though my life returned to a semblance of normalcy, those whispers continued to linger in my mind like a haunting melody. They would forever accompany me, reminding me of the mysterious and intricate relationship between humanity and nature, and that when faced with the unknown, We need not only courage, but also a heart willing to listen and understand the deeper truths that lie beneath the surface. I found myself standing in the grand lobby of an age-old hotel, its walls steeped in history and whispers of the past. Each creak of the floorboards a reminder of the countless stories that had unfolded within its confines. My heart raced in anticipation as I gazed upon the ornate chandeliers, their crystals glinting in the soft light, and the faded portraits that lined the walls, each one a silent witness to the passage of time. The hotel had a reputation, notorious for its spectral inhabitants and unsettling occurrences that sent shivers down the spines of even the most skeptical visitors. Room 412, in particular, piqued my curiosity. It was said to be the epicenter of the unknown, a room once used as a medical ward, where countless tragedies unfolded and left a lingering residue of sorrow. The front desk staff, a group of nonchalant souls accustomed to the eerie tales that surrounded the establishment, chuckled among themselves as I inquired about the paranormal aspects of the hotel. "Oh, you'll love it here," a cheerful clerk remarked, her eyes sparkling with amusement, as if she were in on a joke that I was yet to understand. "They say room 412 is quite the experience." Despite their light-hearted demeanor, I felt a chill run down my spine, an instinctive warning that something was amiss. There was something unsettling about the way they spoke, as if they were all too aware of the secrets lurking behind those heavy doors, secrets that had been buried deep within the hotel's history, waiting for someone like me to uncover them. That night, I settled into my room, a quaint yet slightly worn space adorned with floral wallpaper and vintage furnishings that seemed to tell their own stories of love and loss. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of wood polish and age, a nostalgic aroma that both comforted and unnerved me. I had come equipped with a voice recorder, driven by a desire to capture whatever supernatural essence might reside within the hotel's walls. As darkness enveloped the room, the shadows danced along the walls, and I pressed record, my heart racing and ears straining for any hint of otherworldly murmurs that might break the silence. It wasn't long before I heard it, a faint, disembodied voice reverberating through the stillness of the night. 412, it whispered, the sound both chilling and alluring, wrapping around me like a cold embrace. I sat bolt upright, breathless and wide-eyed, my pulse quickening as the realization of what I had just heard sank in. The voice was soft yet insistent, laced with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher, a haunting blend of longing and despair. A wave of dread washed over me, yet an undeniable curiosity tugged at my feet, urging me to take a step forward into the unknown. I had to explore room 412. As I stepped into the hallway, a sense of foreboding filled the air, thick and palpable. The dimly lit corridor stretched out before me, each step echoing ominously against the hardwood floors, a rhythmic reminder of my heartbeat. I approached room 412, the door seemingly alive, pulsating with hidden stories and unspoken words. With a trembling hand, I twisted the knob and stepped inside the darkened room, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. The air was thick with an unsettling energy, oppressive and heavy, and the moonlight trickled through the heavy curtains, casting eerie shadows across the floor that seemed to shift and sway. My heart raced as I fumbled with my recorder, desperate to capture the moment, to document whatever might unfold in this room steeped in mystery. I felt drawn to the dusty old bed, its sheets yellowed with age, a testament to the passage of time and the lives that had once filled this space. As I approached, a sudden chill swept through the room, and I could have sworn I saw a figure lurking in the corner, shrouded in darkness, watching me with intent. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice wavering as I strained to see through the shadows. But the figure vanished, leaving me awash in fear and uncertainty. My instinct screamed at me to leave, to escape the oppressive atmosphere that enveloped me, yet I stood frozen in place, a moth drawn to the flame of the unknown. That's when I heard it again, the woman's voice, clearer this time, echoing in the silence like a distant siren. "Help me," she breathed, a mournful plea vibrating through the room, filling the air with an overwhelming sense of sorrow. I felt an ice-cold grip around my heart, squeezing tighter with each passing second, and every instinct told me to flee. But I stepped closer, compelled by an urge I couldn't ignore, as if the room itself were beckoning me to uncover its secrets. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, trembling with fear and curiosity. The temperature in the room plummeted, and I could see my breath clouding in the air, each exhale a visible reminder of my vulnerability. With a shuddering gasp, the figure re-emerged, less defined but unmistakably present, a ghostly apparition that sent chills racing down my spine. A ghastly face emerged from the shadows, a man with hollowed eyes and a twisted smile that made my skin crawl, a visage that seemed to embody the very essence of despair. "Why are you here?" he rasped, his voice low and menacing, echoing thoughts I dared not voice, thoughts that clawed at the edges of my sanity. Panic washed over me, and I felt my legs turn to lead, rooted to the spot as the walls seemed to close in around me, suffocating in their intensity. I stumbled backward, my heart racing uncontrollably, a primal instinct urging me to escape. "No!" I shouted, backing away until my back hit the door, the solid barrier a false sense of security. Desperate, I clutched the knob, my breath coming in short gasps, each inhale a struggle against the weight of fear. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice cracking under the weight of my terror, the question hanging in the air like a dark cloud. Suddenly, the room filled with whispers, frantic and desperate, surrounding me like a storm of anguish, a cacophony of voices that clawed at my mind. "Help us!" they cried, hundreds of voices overlapping, each one carrying tales of despair and loss, echoes of a time long past. The room morphed into a whirlwind of shadows, flashes of the hotel's grim history materializing before my eyes, a line of patients, pale and lifeless, lined up for examination, their faces twisted in agony, forever trapped in this place of suffering. The man stepped forward, his shadow swallowing me whole, a dark void that threatened to consume my very essence. "You shouldn't have come here," he warned, his tone a mix of anger and sorrow, a warning that resonated deep within my soul. His eyes bore into mine, and I felt as if I was staring into a void of despair, a chasm that threatened to pull me in. Terrified, I tore my gaze away and flung the door open, bolting back into the hallway, my heart racing as I fled the oppressive atmosphere of room 412. The soft laughter of the front desk staff echoed in my mind, mingling with the trauma I had just unearthed, a haunting reminder of the normalcy that existed just beyond those cursed walls. My chest tightened as I stumbled down the corridor, desperate to escape the heavy atmosphere that clung to my skin like a shroud. The lobby felt like a sanctuary as I burst through the entrance, breathless and trembling, a desperate soul seeking refuge from the horrors I had just witnessed. The cheerful clerks glanced at me quizzically, their expressions a stark contrast to the horror I had just faced, their smiles wide and unbothered. "Did you see her?" I gasped, desperate for someone to validate my fear, for someone to acknowledge the terror that had gripped my heart. But instead, they merely chuckled, dismissing my panic with an airy wave, as if my experience were nothing more than a figment of my imagination. "Just a ghost story, my friend," one of them said with a smirk, leaning back against the polished desk, his demeanor casual and carefree. People love the thrill of the unknown. But I knew better. Room 412 was real, the voices were real, and I could still hear them in my mind, echoing like a haunting melody that refused to fade into silence. I grabbed my bag and headed for the exit, the immense hotel looming behind me like a waking nightmare, a dark specter that threatened to swallow me whole. As I stepped out into the night, the air felt lighter, a stark contrast to the oppressive weight of what I had experienced inside. But my heart remained heavy with the burden of those voices, the echoes of their pain reverberating in my mind. I glanced back at the hotel, its lights flickering like dark stars in the distance, a beacon of horror that would forever haunt my dreams. I couldn't shake the feeling that the hotel watched me leave, its walls whispering secrets meant to remain buried, secrets that had clawed their way to the surface. And as I drove away, the echo of that haunting voice followed me, "Help me." The words lingered in my mind, a chilling reminder that some stories must never be told, and some places are best left undisturbed, locked away in the shadows where they belong. I often find myself pondering whether the shadows that linger around me are mere figments of my imagination, or if they are rooted in a terrifying truth that I have yet to fully confront and understand. It was during one seemingly ordinary night, while I was lost in the labyrinth of my memories, reminiscing about my childhood, that the recollections surged back like a tidal wave, each one tinged with a sense of dread that I could never quite shake off, no matter how hard I tried. As a boy, I was utterly captivated by the pulsing lights of the amusement park that took over our town every summer, transforming the landscape into a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds. They were beacons of joy, drawing children and families from all corners, yet all I could think of was the chilling rumor that swirled among the kids. A boy named Timmy had vanished there years ago, swallowed whole by the very lights that danced above the rides. The more I thought about it, the more those bright colors felt menacing, lurking with secrets and dangers that were invisible to the untrained eye. I could vividly recall the small, frenzied faces of children as they played beneath those lights, entirely oblivious to the shadows that lurked just beyond their peripheral vision, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was after one of those summer nights, when I had begged my father to take me to the fair, my excitement palpable and my heart racing, that I began to notice strange occurrences around our home. At first, they were innocent enough, easily dismissed. Doors creaked open when no one was there, and the lights would flicker unpredictably, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. But as the summer drew closer to an end, I started seeing silhouettes darting outside my window, slipping in and out of the darkness like shadows trying to escape the sun's grasp, leaving me feeling uneasy and vulnerable. I confided in my father about the unsettling things I had been experiencing, but he dismissed my fears with a wave of his hand, assuring me that it was all just my imagination running wild. "There's nothing out there, kiddo," he said, ruffling my hair in a genuine yet weary manner, as if trying to reassure both me and himself. But deep down, I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes, a reflection of the fear I couldn't comprehend, an unspoken acknowledgement that perhaps there was something more lurking in the shadows. My father had once been a vibrant man, full of laughter and ideas that danced like the lights at the fair. However, ever since Aunt Flora disappeared under suspicious circumstances, he had transformed into a shell of his former self. His nights were filled with ghostly murmurs and sleeplessness, cloaking him in an ever-present shroud of anxiety that seemed to suffocate him. I could only think that somehow Flora's fate had entwined itself with our own lives, saturating my father with an existential dread that seeped into our family like a poisonous gas, infecting every corner of our home. As the shadows loomed larger in our lives, the tales of Timmy resurfaced with a vengeance. Kids at school whispered about the boy who had been taken, his disappearance tied to the notorious figure named Chaved, who was rumored to lurk in the park's depths, watching and waiting for another child to claim as his own. The fear clawed at my insides like a feral animal, but my fascination with the story compelled me to dig deeper, to uncover the truth hidden beneath the layers of fear and rumor. One fateful night, emboldened by the schoolyard gossip and the brave faces of my friends, I decided to venture out into the park, the very place where Timmy had gone missing, a place that had become a ghostly legend in our town. My heart raced as I walked past the rusted rides, each one casting impossibly long shadows under the moonlight that bathed everything in a silvery glow. In the distance, the old carousel creaked, its music a deranged melody that echoed into the emptiness, filling the air with a sense of foreboding. Drawn in like a moth to a flame, I wandered deeper, feeling an invisible pull toward the heart of darkness that awaited me. As I approached the carousel, I noticed something strange. a flickering light emanating from one of the nearby stalls, illuminating the ground with an unsettling glow that seemed to pulse with life. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest, and at that moment, I felt a presence. My pulse quickened. I wasn't alone, and the realization sent a shiver down my spine. Timmy? I whispered into the night, a name interwoven with regret and fear, a name that had become a haunting refrain in my mind. I half expected a voice to answer, a ghostly echo that would validate my deepest fears and affirm the stories I had heard. But instead, there was silence, an unsettling silence that hung heavily in the air, wrapping around me like a cold blanket. Suddenly, I heard laughter, a child's laughter that carried a melancholic undertone, a sound that beckoned me, urging me to come closer, to step further into the depths of the unknown. My instinct screamed for me to turn back, to flee before whatever haunted this place found me too, before I became another name whispered among the shadows. But curiosity surged within me like an uncontrollable wildfire, drawing me into the light, pulling me toward the mystery that lay ahead. I stepped into the glow and found myself staring at a tattered poster that had once advertised the park, a remnant of happier times. The smiling faces of children danced joyfully across its surface, their eyes sparkling with innocence, but beneath the surface, I saw something else, blurred images of sadness, loss, and maybe even madness. My heart sank as I took it all in, the way their eyes seemed to follow me, begging for help from a realm I couldn't comprehend, a realm that felt all too familiar. Just then, my father's warning echoed in my mind, "Don't trust the shadows, they lie." But it was too late. Just as I turned to leave, I felt it, the chill creeping up my spine, the sensation of being watched, as if the very shadows had come alive to ensnare me. A fleeting figure darted from the depths of the stalls, and I caught a glimpse of a twisted, shadowy face, shaved. The very name sent shivers down my spine, igniting a primal fear within me. I bolted into the night, racing away from the malevolent force that sought to ensnare me, to claim me as its own. My feet pounded against the pavement as I sprinted toward the exit, desperate to escape the memory of that haunted look that would forever be etched in my mind. When I finally made it home, I found my father waiting up for me, his face a mask of worry. The concern etched across his features morphed into anger as I recounted my experience, my voice trembling with the weight of what I had seen. "You shouldn't have gone there," he yelled, his voice breaking with a mix of rage and fear that echoed in the quiet of our home. "You don't understand what happened to Flora. We can't afford to lose you too." His words struck me like a lightning bolt, illuminating the truth I had been too afraid to acknowledge. I could see it clearly now. My father wasn't just afraid of losing me, but afraid of the shadows that had taken hold of our family, of the darkness that threatened to consume us. A darkness that seeped from the past and loomed over the present, casting a long shadow that felt impossible to escape. In the days that followed, I tried to forget that night, to push it deep into the recesses of my mind. Still, those flickering lights haunted my dreams, and the echo of laughter filled my thoughts at the most unexpected moments, creeping into my consciousness like a thief in the night. The creeping dread became a constant companion, one that whispered secrets of despair and haunting memories that refused to fade. I delved deeper into researching Flora's disappearance, piecing together the fragmented stories that spoke of her last known moments, her final days filled with uncertainty and fear. The more I uncovered, the more I realized her disappearance was entwined with Timmy's, forming a web of tragedy that linked their fates. There were two souls lost to the darkness, two casualties of a sinister realm that seemed to hold a monopoly on the children of our town, a realm that thrived on fear and despair. Driven by a need to find answers, I approached my father one late evening, my heart heavy with the weight of unasked questions. "Dad, I need to know what happened to Flora," I pleaded, hoping that unearthing the truth might bring me peace, a sense of closure that had long evaded us. His expression shifted from anger to despair, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, a window into the pain he had buried deep within. Sometimes the past is better left buried, he replied, his voice trembling, the weight of his words hanging in the air like a fog. Flora was searching for something she thought would help us. But it led to her end, and it nearly took me too. With that, my heart sank, the realization crashing over me like a wave. The very shadows I had feared began to take form in my mind, shaping into a dark spectacle that was both terrifying and puzzling. What was she searching for? I asked hesitantly, my desperation rising like a tide threatening to overwhelm me. Answers, he said, looking distant, as if he were staring into a memory he couldn't bear to relive, a memory filled with regret and sorrow. But what she uncovered, it was beyond our understanding. That knowledge came at a price we were not prepared to pay. His words echoed through my mind for days, lingering like a ghost that refused to leave, haunting me with the weight of unspoken truths. I realized in that moment, my deepest fears had a name, the truth. The truth about the shadows that loomed over our family, about the darkness that took Flora from us, leaving only questions in her wake. No longer could I ignore the feeling that those shadows were attempting to take me too, to ensnare me in their web of despair. I began to hear whispers in the wind, echoing fragments of a truth I was afraid to unearth, fragments that danced just out of reach. Maybe the flickering lights and the laughter weren't just remnants of fear, but rather beacons guiding me toward something I was destined to face, something that would either liberate me or consume me. So, one fateful night, I resolved to return to the park, not as the scared child I once was, but as someone searching for answers. Someone determined to confront the darkness that had haunted my family for far too long. I stepped through the familiar entrance, my heart racing as I ventured deeper into the swirling lights and shadows that felt both inviting and foreboding. The park felt alive, pulsating with energy as I walked through the rides, the music playing almost in harmony with my increasing pulse, a sinister melody that echoed in the depths of my soul. As I approached the old carousel, I zeroed in on the glow that still beckoned, my own personal lighthouse amid a storm of uncertainty. The laughter returned, only this time it was a chorus, a haunting symphony that resonated through the air, leading me toward the truth I had been denying, a truth that had been waiting for me all along. Just then, as I absorbed the atmosphere of confusion and dread, I saw her. Flora. She stood before me, not as the lost figure I had envisioned, but as a specter of longing and regret, a ghost tethered to the past. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mix of sorrow and a desperate need for redemption, a plea that transcended the boundaries of life and death. "Help me," she cried, her voice echoing in the recesses of my mind, a haunting melody that pulled at my heartstrings. Frozen in place, I mustered the courage to step forward, to bridge the chasm between us. "What happened to you?" I asked, my voice trembling, barely above a whisper, filled with both fear and determination. I sought to understand the shadows, to discover their secrets, she confessed, the desperation evident in her voice, a voice that trembled like the leaves in the wind. But I paid a toll, a price for knowledge. Now I am bound to this place, chained by my own curiosity and the choices I made. The realization sank in like a stone in my gut. I was not just a victim of the shadows, I was a part of them. They had been watching me all along, waiting for me to uncover the darkness that encircled my family, a darkness that had claimed Flora and threatened to claim me as well. "What do I need to do?" I whispered, my heart pounding against my chest like a caged bird desperate to escape. "Face the shadows, confront your own fears," she urged, her voice growing fainter with each word, like a candle flickering in the wind. "If you wish to free me and yourself, you must uncover the truth buried deep within, the truth that has been hidden for far too long." As she faded into the ether, a surge of determination washed over me, igniting a fire within my soul. I had to embrace the darkness, the terrifying truth that had long cast its shadow over my life, that had haunted my family for generations. With every step forward, I felt the flickering lights intensify, illuminating the path that lay before me, a path that promised both danger and revelation. I returned home, the weight of my family's past heavy on my shoulders, a burden I could no longer ignore. Driven by a newfound purpose, I began laying bare the secrets that had shrouded us for so long, peeling back the layers of deception that had kept us trapped in a cycle of fear. I combed through old letters, photographs, and articles, exposing the darkness that intertwined my family's history with those shadows that had once terrified me, unraveling the threads of despair that bound us. The more I unearthed, the clearer the truth became. Flora's disappearance was not just random, it was part of a larger tapestry woven with threads of tragedy and loss. Chaved had a pattern, a cruel game he played, a puppet master orchestrating the darkness that surrounded us, manipulating our fears and feeding off our despair. And as I delved deeper, I realized he was still watching, his eyes lurking in the corners of my mind, waiting for another soul to ensnare in his web of shadows. But this time, I wouldn't shy away from the confrontation. With every revelation, I felt empowered to reclaim my family's narrative, faced with the haunting presence of the shadows I had once feared. I would not allow fear to dictate my life any longer. I would confront the darkness head-on, no matter the cost. I gathered enough courage to confront my father, opening the floodgates of secrets, revealing the buried emotions we had both endured in silence. We shared our fears and regrets, unearthing the pain that had been festering between us for so long, a pain that had kept us apart even as we lived under the same roof. As we spoke, I could feel the weight of the shadows begin to lift, like a fog dissipating under the warmth of the sun. They didn't hold the power they once did, and I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. The flickering lights that had once drawn me into their grasp now felt like a fading memory, a reminder of what I had conquered by facing my fears and embracing the truth. And in that moment, I realized the shadows may always be a part of me, but they could no longer control me or dictate my actions. The truth had set me free, illuminating the path toward healing and acceptance, a path that promised a brighter future. With the echoes of Flora's faded laughter still lingering in my mind, I stepped forward, ready to embrace the future unencumbered by the shadows of my past. Finally, I understood the power of the light and the darkness, and with that knowledge came an unshakable resolve to forge my destiny, free from the chains that once bound me, determined to live a life unshackled by fear and regret. My name is Adam, and I'm just your typical office worker trying to make a living in this bustling, chaotic city. Every day feels like a monotonous routine, flowing by like water in a river, each moment blending seamlessly into the next. That was until I stumbled upon information about a drug trial called Mentanovics. This trial was being organized by a company named New Life Technologies, and it aimed to test a new drug's effects on human consciousness. Intrigued by the potential of this experimental drug, especially since it claimed to enhance thinking speed and perception, I felt a surge of curiosity and excitement. Without a second thought, I signed up for the trial, eager to see what it could do for me. On the very first day of the trial, I walked into the lab, nervous yet hopeful, and was greeted by a scientist named Helen. She had a wild gleam in her eyes, a spark of enthusiasm that suggested she was eagerly anticipating the experiment that was about to unfold. She took the time to explain how the drug worked, detailing its mechanisms and potential effects, and then had me sign a consent form. I felt a twinge of unease as I signed, but my curiosity about the unknown pushed me to move forward despite my apprehensions. In the days that followed, I went through a series of rigorous tests, each one more intense than the last, and eventually, I received my injection of Mentanovics. Almost immediately, the drug kicked in, and I experienced a clarity of thought that was unlike anything I had ever felt before. Time began to slow down around me. Each second stretched out before me, and I could feel every tiny shift in my thinking, as if my mind had suddenly been unleashed from its usual constraints. However, as time progressed, my perception began to warp in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The initial clarity I experienced gradually transformed into an indescribable fear, a creeping sense of dread that began to take hold of my mind. My consciousness felt like it was being torn apart, unraveling at the seams, and time began to spin wildly in my mind, creating a chaotic whirlwind of thoughts and sensations. I felt as if I had suddenly awakened in the Glenmont subway station, everything around me turning into a blur of confusion and uncertainty. In that moment, a horrifying thought flashed through my mind. I had been trapped in this place for what felt like 8 million years. During this long stretch of time, I endured a level of suffering that was beyond anything I could have imagined. Every second felt like a century, my thinking speed magnified infinitely, and the sensation of pain intensified with each passing moment. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, a relentless reminder of my helplessness and despair. I tried to struggle against the overwhelming tide of fear, tried to escape this endless nightmare, but no matter how hard I fought, I couldn't shake off that feeling of utter hopelessness. As time continued to pass, my consciousness began to crumble under the weight of the experiment. My brain felt shattered, splintered into countless pieces from the strain of this insane ordeal, and I sensed that I was being consumed by it all. Just as I was on the brink of losing my sanity completely, I heard a low, mocking laugh echoing in the depths of my mind, as if Helen was watching my suffering with a twisted sense of satisfaction. Her laughter reverberated in my head, like an invisible shackle binding me in this endless darkness, trapping me in a nightmare from which I could not awaken. The scientists in the lab were attempting to understand this bizarre phenomenon, constantly discussing the interaction between the drug and various sleeping pills, searching for the reason behind my extreme reaction. Yet, their discussions faded into a blur in my ears, sounding like distant echoes of voices that I could no longer comprehend. I could no longer bear this torment, the pressure was too much, and eventually, my consciousness collapsed into a chaotic abyss, leaving me adrift in a sea of confusion. When I finally woke up, I found myself lying on a lab bed, surrounded by an eerie silence that felt suffocating. Helen was nowhere to be found, and the lab felt oddly empty, as if it had been abandoned. I struggled to recall what had just happened, but my mind was blank, a void where memories should have been. My body felt incredibly weak, as if I had just endured a terrifying nightmare that had drained every ounce of strength from me. I attempted to get up, but my limbs felt powerless, as if they were being held down by an invisible force that I couldn't see. At that moment, my gaze was drawn to a transparent glass wall. Through it, I saw other participants who had been injected with Mentanovics, their eyes vacant and lifeless, as if they had lost their very souls. A wave of fear washed over me. Would I end up like them, trapped in a state of eternal emptiness? I began searching for an exit, but the entire lab felt like a massive maze, with no way out in sight. Just when I was feeling utterly hopeless, Helen suddenly appeared in front of me. She wore a strange, almost predatory smile, as if she were relishing my fear and despair. "Welcome back, Adam," her voice was low and hoarse, echoing like a call from the depths of hell. "Did you not know? This is just the beginning." I was taken aback, realizing with a sinking feeling that she had no intention of letting me leave. Her eyes revealed a kind of mad desire, a relentless pursuit of some inexpressible experimental result that seemed to drive her. She began subjecting me to even more extreme tests, each injection plunging me deeper into a pit of despair and hopelessness. In the days that followed, I was forced to experience one-time travel after another, each session more harrowing than the last. With each round, I felt the relentless passage of time, as if I were trapped in an endless loop from which there was no escape. My thoughts accelerated continuously, racing out of control, and the pain escalated with each round of testing. I began to question my own existence, wondering whether I was still alive or if I had already become a part of the experiment, lost to the world. Just when I was on the verge of breaking down completely, I spotted a glimmer of hope. There was a small vent in the lab wall, and I thought maybe it could lead me out of this nightmare. I gathered my last bit of courage and crawled toward the vent, my heart racing with the possibility of escape. Just as I was about to reach it, Helen's figure appeared before me once more, blocking my path. "Do you really think you can escape?" Her voice dripped with sarcasm, a cruel mockery of my desperation. "You're already my test subject, forever unable to leave this place." Despair washed over me like a tidal wave, but the will to survive pushed me to keep struggling. I charged toward the vent with all the strength I could muster and finally squeezed into the narrow opening. Just when I thought I could escape, a powerful force yanked me back, pulling me away from freedom. I fought desperately against it, but it was futile, and I was dragged back to the lab, back to the nightmare I was trying to escape. From that point on, my life grew even darker, descending into a pit of despair. Each day, I was forced to endure endless experiments, each injection bringing deeper pain and suffering. Gradually, I came to realize that I had no choice but to submit to this insane experiment, trapped in a cycle of torment. I began to struggle in the darkness, trying to find a glimmer of hope amidst the despair. Whenever I closed my eyes, I would recall my previous life, those simple and beautiful moments that now felt like distant memories. I longed to escape this nightmare, to return to the sunny world I once knew. However, reality was cruel. I was trapped in this endless experiment, unable to break free from the chains that bound me. Eventually, after one experiment too many, my consciousness collapsed completely, leaving me as an unconscious shell, devoid of any sense of self. Helen's laughter echoed in my ears, a haunting reminder of my helplessness and despair. I knew, deep down, that I could never escape this nightmare, forever trapped in this endless darkness that consumed me. In this long, torturous night, I lost myself completely, my desire for life fading into nothingness. I became a soulless experiment, eternally sinking in the whirlpool of time, lost in the depths of my own mind, with no hope of ever returning to the surface. In the oppressive heat of the summer of 1982, I found myself in the small, unassuming town of Walden, Texas. The sun blazed relentlessly overhead, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally, while the air hung thick with an unsettling stillness that wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. I had come here with a group of friends, a motley crew eager to escape the mundane routine of our everyday lives. We were drawn to the town's haunted past, captivated by tales of strange occurrences that had sent its residents fleeing in terror. Little did I know that our innocent curiosity would lead us down a dark and twisted path of despair and fear that would haunt us forever. The first sign that something was amiss came unexpectedly when we stumbled upon an old, abandoned church on the outskirts of town. Its weathered wooden doors creaked ominously as we pushed them open, revealing a dusty interior filled with shattered pews and peeling paint that seemed to tell stories of long-forgotten prayers. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and mildew, and a chill ran down my spine as I stepped inside. As we explored the church, my friends joked about the ghost stories we had heard, their laughter echoing off the walls, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched by unseen eyes lurking in the shadows. That night, we decided to camp out in the church, thinking it would add to the thrill of our adventure and make for a memorable experience. We set up our sleeping bags on the cold, hard floor, surrounded by the remnants of a forgotten congregation. As darkness enveloped us, the flickering light of our campfire cast eerie, dancing shadows on the walls, and I felt a growing sense of unease settle in my stomach. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew there was something more sinister at play. As the hours passed, strange noises began to fill the air, whispers that seemed to echo from the corners of the church, unintelligible yet haunting, weaving through the silence like an unsettling melody. My friends laughed nervously, attributing the sounds to the wind outside, but I knew better. There was something darker lurking in the shadows, something that had not forgotten the pain it had witnessed in this forsaken place. The next day, driven by our insatiable curiosity, we ventured deeper into the town, our exploration leading us to the local library. There, we uncovered the chilling history of Walden, a narrative steeped in tragedy and mystery. In the early 1980s, a series of mysterious events had unfolded, events that had left the town in shambles and its residents in fear. 5 students had vanished without a trace, their bodies later discovered in the woods, hidden beneath the underbrush. 4 of them were found crucified, their lifeless forms arranged in a grotesque display that sent shivers down my spine, while the 5th bore the chilling inscription "Daddy Longlegs" carved into his chest, a grotesque reminder of the horrors that had transpired. The police had ruled it a mass suicide, but the townsfolk whispered of a dark figure that had been seen lurking in the shadows, a tall man dressed in black, his presence accompanied by an aura of dread that seemed to suffocate the very air around him. They claimed he was a preacher, a harbinger of violence who had driven the students to their tragic end. The more we learned about the town's dark history, the more I felt an inexplicable connection to the events that had transpired, as if the shadows of the past were reaching out to ensnare me. That night, as we returned to the church, the atmosphere felt heavier than before, thick with an oppressive energy that made my skin crawl. The whispers grew louder, echoing in my mind like a sinister lullaby, wrapping around me like a shroud. I could see the flickering shadows dancing along the walls, and I felt an overwhelming urge to leave this place of nightmares, but my friends were determined to stay. They laughed and joked, trying to lighten the mood, but I could sense the tension building, a palpable fear that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. As the clock struck midnight, we heard a loud bang from outside, followed by a low, guttural growl that sent panic surging through me. I urged my friends to leave, to run, but they were frozen in place, their faces pale with fear, eyes wide with terror. It was then that I saw him, a figure standing at the edge of the woods, tall and imposing, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light that pierced through the darkness. He raised his arms, and I felt an icy grip clutch my heart, paralyzing me with dread. In that moment, I knew we were not alone. The whispers grew into a cacophony of voices, each one pleading for release, for justice, a chorus of anguish that filled the air. My friends finally broke free from their stupor and ran, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to look away from the figure that seemed to draw me in. It felt as if time had stopped, and I was trapped in a nightmare from which I could not awaken, a prisoner of my own fear. Suddenly, the figure lunged forward, and I stumbled back, my heart racing wildly in my chest. I turned to flee, but the church doors slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping us inside. My friends banged on the doors, screaming for help, but their cries were drowned out by the oppressive silence that enveloped us. I felt the presence of the tall man closing in on me, his looming figure casting a long shadow that seemed to stretch across the room. I could hear his voice now, a low, rumbling tone that sent shivers down my spine. "You should not have come here," he whispered, his breath cold against my skin, sending chills racing through my body. In a desperate bid for escape, I grabbed a nearby candlestick and swung it at the shadows, but it passed through them as if they were smoke, leaving me feeling helpless and vulnerable. The whispers intensified, drowning out my thoughts, and I felt myself being pulled toward the figure, drawn in by an unseen force. I fought against the invisible grip, but it was too strong, too overwhelming. I could see my friends' terrified faces as they desperately tried to open the doors, but it was as if they were sealed by an unseen power, a barrier that held us captive. Just when I thought I would be consumed by the darkness, the figure paused, his eyes narrowing as he regarded me with an intensity that sent a jolt of fear through my veins. "You carry the mark," he said, his voice a haunting melody that echoed in my mind, reverberating through the very core of my being. "You are one of them." The words struck me like a physical blow, and I felt a surge of memories flood my mind, visions of the past, of the students, of the violence that had unfolded in this cursed place, each memory a shard of glass cutting into my soul. Suddenly, I was transported back to that fateful day in 1982. I saw the students, their faces twisted in fear and desperation as they were led into the woods by the tall man, their fates sealed by a darkness they could not comprehend. I witnessed the horror of their final moments, the betrayal that had driven them to their doom, and I felt their pain, their anguish, and their desperate cries for help echoing in my ears. It was overwhelming, a tidal wave of emotion that crashed over me, and I fell to my knees, tears streaming down my face as I became a vessel for their suffering. As the visions faded, I found myself back in the church, the figure looming over me like a dark cloud. "You cannot escape your past," he said, his voice dripping with malice, each word a reminder of the chains that bound me. "You are bound to this place." With those words, he vanished into the shadows, leaving me alone in the suffocating darkness, the weight of his words pressing down on me like a leaden shroud. My friends finally managed to break free from the doors, and we stumbled into the night, gasping for air as if we had just emerged from the depths of a nightmare. We ran without looking back, not stopping until we reached the safety of our car, our hearts racing in our chests. As we drove away from Walden, I could still hear the whispers in my mind, echoing the words of the tall man, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lingered. I thought I had escaped, but deep down, I knew the truth. The darkness had marked me, and it would never let me go, a shadow that would follow me wherever I went. Years passed, and I tried to forget the horrors of that summer, to bury the memories deep within me like a hidden wound. I moved on with my life, but the whispers never truly faded. They haunted my dreams, creeping into my thoughts during the quiet moments of the day, a constant reminder of the darkness I had faced. The weight of the past lingered like a shadow, always just out of sight, a specter that refused to be exorcised. Then, one fateful day, I received an email that shattered my fragile peace, sending a jolt of fear through my veins. The subject line read "Daddy Longlegs," and my heart raced as I opened it, dread pulling in my stomach. The message was simply yet chilling. "You should have stayed away. The shadows are waiting for you." My hands trembled as I read the words, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. It was a reminder that I could never truly escape the darkness of Walden, a truth I had tried so hard to deny. I tried to dismiss it as a prank, a cruel joke from someone who knew my past, but the following days brought more messages, each one more sinister than the last, each one a chilling reminder of what I had tried to forget. They spoke of the tall man, of the students, and of the violence that had consumed the town. I felt the grip of fear tightening around me, squeezing the breath from my lungs, and I knew I had to confront the past that I had tried so hard to bury. With a heavy heart, I returned to Walden, the memories flooding back like a tidal wave as I drove through the desolate streets. The town was a ghost of its former self, the once vibrant community now reduced to crumbling buildings and overgrown weeds, a haunting reminder of the lives that had been lost. I parked outside the old church, my heart pounding in my chest, the air thick with an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow me whole. I could feel the whispers beckoning me from within, calling me back to the darkness. As I stepped inside, the darkness enveloped me once more, wrapping around me like a suffocating shroud. The shadows danced along the walls, and I could hear the faint echoes of laughter and cries, the remnants of the past that refused to be silenced. I called out, my voice trembling with fear and uncertainty, "Is anyone here?" But only silence answered, a chilling reminder of the emptiness that had consumed this place. It was then that I saw him, the tall figure standing at the altar, his eyes glowing like embers in the night, a beacon of dread that sent a surge of terror through me. I felt a surge of fear, but I stood my ground, determined to face the darkness that had haunted me for so long. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through my veins, a flicker of defiance igniting within me. "You cannot run from your fate," he replied, his voice a haunting melody that sent chills down my spine, wrapping around me like a vice. "You are part of this story, and it is far from over." With those words, he raised his hand, and the whispers grew louder, drowning out my thoughts, a chaotic symphony of despair that threatened to consume me. In that moment, I understood the truth. I was not merely a witness to the horrors of Walden. I was a part of them, intertwined with the darkness that had seeped into my very soul. I could feel the weight of the students' pain, their cries for justice echoing in my mind, and I knew I had to confront the past that had bound me to this place, to break the cycle of violence that had plagued the town for so long. With a newfound resolve, I stepped forward, determined to reclaim my power and break free from the chains that bound me. "I will not let you control me," I declared, my voice rising above the whispers, a battle cry against the darkness. "I will set you free." The figure paused, his expression shifting as if he were taken aback by my defiance, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. The shadows flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw the faces of the students, lost souls trapped in a never-ending nightmare, their eyes filled with sorrow and pain. I reached out to them, feeling their anguish and despair, and I vowed to honor their memory, to give them the justice they had been denied. As I spoke their names, the whispers began to fade, replaced by a sense of peace that washed over me like a cleansing tide. The tall figure watched, his eyes narrowing in disbelief, the darkness around him beginning to wane. "You cannot change the past," he warned, his voice tinged with a hint of desperation, but I could feel the power of my words resonating through the church, a force of light pushing back the shadows. "I can change what it means to me," I replied, my heart swelling with determination, the fire of resolve igniting within me. "I will not let fear dictate my life any longer." With that, the darkness began to recede, the shadows retreating into the corners of the church, their grip on me loosening as I stood firm in my newfound strength. The tall figure's form flickered, and I could see the anguish etched on his face, a reflection of the pain he had caused. "You are stronger than I anticipated," he admitted, his voice tinged with a hint of respect, a grudging acknowledgement of my power. As the last of the shadows faded, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a burden I had carried for far too long. The whispers had quieted, replaced by a serene silence that enveloped the church, a blanket of peace that washed over me. I had broken the cycle, and the souls of the students were finally free, released from the torment that had bound them for so long. I turned to leave, a sense of closure washing over me like a gentle tide. As I stepped outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the town, illuminating the path ahead. I knew I would carry the memories of Walden with me, but they would no longer haunt me. Instead, they would serve as a reminder of the strength I had found in the face of darkness, a testament to the power of resilience. As I drove away from Walden, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw the tall figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching me depart, a silent guardian of the past. But this time, I felt no fear, only a sense of peace and closure. The shadows may whisper, but I had learned to face them, and in that knowledge, I found my freedom. I had confronted the darkness, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my life, no longer a prisoner of fear, but a survivor, ready to embrace the light.